So it's finally been made official. It's title versus title. It's AEW World Champion versus Impact World Champion at Impact Wrestling Rebellion in April. It's something that we've been speculating here on the channel for a really long time. I think ever since we really started to have this Impact Wrestling and AEW working relationship, what I've kind of speculated about here on the channel is that what's the biggest match that they can do? What's the end game? What's the end goal when it comes to this? And I always felt the end game and end goal was a title versus title, AEW World Champion versus Impact World Champion main event at a big pay-per-view, and that's looking like exactly what it is, exactly what we're going to get at Impact Wrestling Rebellion in April. Now, before concluding last night's go-home show, before Impact Sacrifice this weekend, Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore has announced that Rich Swann and Moose will defend both their Impact World and TNA World Heavyweight Championships in a unification match on Saturday. The winner will then go on to face AEW World Champion Kenny Omega in the main event of Rebellion on Saturday, April 24 in a title versus title match. Now, after a back and forth exchange since Hard to Kill, Moose has been targeting Swann for a World Championship shot. He's been actually targeting Rich Swann for a World Championship shot all the way going back to just after Bound for Glory last October. Nevertheless, coincidentally, this feud arose just before they took a major loss to Kenny Omega and the Impact World Tag Team Champions, the Good Brothers, at Hard to Kill. Moose, who originally, of course, brought back the retired TNA World Heavyweight Championship last April at Rebellion, called himself the self-proclaimed champion and has defended it countless times against TNA veterans and current Impact Wrestling stars on the roster. Now, it wasn't until last month that Scott D'Amore officially sanctioned the title again as an official World Championship. It'll be interesting to see who will be the first in the company's history to unify the top titles. Now, when it comes to Sacrifice, of course, it's already been taped, and frankly, the results are out there. We're not going to spoil it here. We're not in the business of spoilers on this channel, but if you do want to find out, it's not hard to find out. Nevertheless, Kenny Omega, on the other hand, he's been on a roll since winning the AEW World Championship off Jon Moxley last December at the Winter is Coming edition of AEW Dynamite on TNT. This past Sunday, of course, at AEW Revolution, Kenny Omega retained his AEW World Championship against Jon Moxley in a rubber match which saw both men compete in AEW's first ever exploding barbed wire death match. And that finished, to say it was a dud. It looked like Gillberg was about to come out, and Eddie Kingston had sacrificed himself regardless of that. Nevertheless, as I mentioned at the top of the video, this is what we've spoken about at length here, frankly, on the channel. I feel like when it comes to Impact Wrestling, when it comes to AEW, when it comes to this working relationship, I've always said, and I think it's really important when you look at these things, I always said you have to look a few months ahead, and you have to look at what's the biggest thing that AEW and Impact Wrestling can do as part of this working relationship. And for me, it always was the AEW World Champion versus the Impact World Champion, and that was, and possibly still is, I mean, we'll have to wait to the event of Sacrifice on Saturday, but that always was Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann. Now it could be Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann or Moose, of course. I still think that potentially, and I don't think they're going to go in this direction. I still felt that they could have made the stakes possibly even higher when it comes to this match by actually making it a triple threat match, a unification match for all three championships. Now, you wouldn't really unify them, but you could have had the AEW World Championship, the Impact World Championship, and the TNA World Heavyweight Championship all on the line in the same match. That would have been pretty interesting to see, wouldn't it? I'd been very interested to see how that one played out. But it's not. We're not going in that direction. We're going for the straight singles match: AEW World Champion versus Impact World Champion, and it's going to be massive. I mean, it really is going to be massive for Impact Wrestling. I think, you know, we've been covering Impact here on the channel for a while now. It's really in-depth since around last summer, since around Slammiversary time, and I've been a fan of Impact Wrestling for years and years prior to that. I mean, we're going back to the early days of TNA in the early 2000s. But we've really seen a real renaissance when it comes to Impact Wrestling over the course of the last 12 months. Frankly, when it comes to the product for Impact Wrestling has actually been very strong for the last 2-3 years, maybe even a bit longer. Really since the Scott D'Amore and Don Callis era coming in for Anthem, they've really stepped up the game, and it's just taken a while for people to stand up and take notice and pay attention to the product. Why? Because obviously there's a lot of damage there, isn't there? When it comes to the Impact Wrestling brand, there's a lot of damage because of all of the bad things that it's done throughout the year. I mean, it's nearly died. I mean, it's got more lives than a cat, hasn't it? I mean, talk about a cat having 9 lives. Impact Wrestling appears to have about 50. They've nearly gone out of business a million times. You've got the Dixie Carter years, Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, Bruce Pritchard, Vince Russo, Jeff Jarrett. I mean, the names go on and on of cataclysmic failures in the history of Impact Wrestling. And I think after time, people just assumed it wasn't around. You'd be surprised the amount of comments I get on the channel when I do a video talking about Impact Wrestling, saying that Impact Wrestling's still a thing, TNA Wrestling's still a thing. I thought they went bankrupt. I don't think they existed anymore. You would be surprised how often I get that on the channel. So it's really exciting to see Impact Wrestling making waves again. This is a big news story, and it's a big match. Now, I know some people might criticize maybe Rich Swann or even Moose in this scenario. That are they really at the level to be competing with a Kenny Omega in a pay-per-view main event and title versus title? Well, I think I understand people's reservations when it comes to that, but I think, frankly, you have to give them an opportunity. And whoever faces off against Kenny Omega, that's for either guy, whether it's Rich Swann, whether it's Moose, it's going to be the biggest match of their career. I mean, it really is. It's going to be the biggest match of their career, and it's going to be a great match. I think. This is what I said when it came to Hard to Kill as well, that some people were surprised when it came to Kenny Omega that he didn't have the singles match at Hard to Kill and he teamed up with the Good Brothers and all that kind of stuff. I always go back to the initial report. I always go back to that initial report just after Kenny Omega and Don Callis turned heel on the Winter is Coming edition of Dynamite, when they did the whole, you'll have to find out on Impact Wrestling Tuesday night on Access TV, all that kind of stuff. I hate to always bring this up, and I hate to make it feel like I'm picking on the website or I'm picking on the person, but it's worth repeating. You know, Nick Hausman said, there was a report that came out right after that and said, look, I know people are excited about Kenny Omega appearing on Impact Wrestling this coming week, but it's going to be a one-off. It's only being done as a favor to Don Callis. Don't get your hopes up. Kenny Omega isn't going to be working any matches. The working relationship between Impact Wrestling and AEW isn't going to be that involved, isn't that going to be that intertwined. So let's not get our hopes up and our expectations too high, because this is just a one-off and this is just a favor. This is just something to create a little bit of buzz. That was in December. We are now setting up a match that's AEW World Champion versus Impact World Champion, title for title. So one person's going to be leaving Rebellion as both the AEW and Impact World Champion. That's in April. Okay, so 4 or 5 months later, this AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship is now featured in New Japan as well. And we've got big title versus title matches. Tony Khan has been on an episode of Impact Wrestling every single week. I mean, every single week. He hasn't missed a single episode. He's even appeared inside the Impact Zone on an episode of Impact Wrestling too. We've had the likes of Matt Hardy, Private Party, Sammy Guevara was meant to be on Impact Wrestling, of course. We've got the Good Brothers appearing on AEW Dynamite as well regularly and on AEW programming. This working relationship is very involved. So it just makes you wonder what the sources were or what the insider information was when it goes back to that initial report, because talk about being well off the mark. I mean, really well off the mark. And I'm not going to be one to claim that, oh, we had all of this insider information or I told you so or anything like that. But it always seemed obvious to me that this is what they were probably building towards, right? It's always felt obvious. If you watch that first Kenny Omega promo on Impact Wrestling back in December after he became the AEW World Champion, his first comments on television since he became the AEW World Champion, he said it in the promo. He did this whole spiel about collecting comic books as a kid, and then he realized he couldn't collect them all, so he gave up on that, and he moved his attention on collecting championships. He's a bout collector, was the phrase and the quote that he used. And as soon as he said that, I mean, alarm bells were ringing, I think, in most people's head, but definitely in my head, I was going, okay, well, he's going to go after the Impact World Championship. It's obvious that's where they're going towards. Now, my question at the time, and this is something that I questioned subsequently after the fact, was, we knew that Rich Swann versus Moose was going to happen because they were teasing that since Bound for Glory in October. So my question was, you can have these two storylines running parallel, and they did for a while. They had Moose versus Rich Swann, and they also had Rich Swann versus Kenny Omega, and they were kind of running like that, but eventually they have to meet. And that's what we're getting now, because they're going to meet coming out of Sacrifice. We're going to have the Moose versus Rich Swann match at Sacrifice. That's going to be a unification match. We spoke about that on the channel a couple of weeks ago, and everyone went, no, it's just for the Impact World Championship. Well, now it's for both the Impact and TNA World Heavyweight Championship, and then that leads into Impact Rebellion, where you've got Kenny Omega versus the Impact World Champion, whoever that may be. Now, in terms of a prediction, an early prediction for that match at Rebellion, I actually did some predictions, and I noted this in a few early videos we spoke about earlier on in the year when it came to Impact Wrestling, specifically this AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship. And a couple of predictions I had at the start of the year was, one, Kenny Omega will compete for the Impact World Championship at some point in 2021. That's confirmed. That's happened. That's happening. And the second one was I felt that Kenny Omega was going to win the Impact World Championship in 2021, and that's still my prediction. I think when it comes to this, I mean, you could argue that this might end up being a bit of an issue, end up being a bit of a problem, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that one, is that, and maybe this is just kind of the case with high-stake matches in general, and it's not necessarily, totally a bad thing, I suppose, is that they've kind of booked themselves into a corner here. And what I mean is, realistically, is Kenny Omega going to lose at Impact Rebellion? The answer is no. He's just not. I mean, he's very protected in terms of his booking right now. He's the AEW World Champion. I can't recall the last time he actually did a job and he got pinned or anything like that on AEW television. It's certainly been a long, long time. And that's because he's the AEW World Champion. That's because AEW, they book their champions very, very strong. And when it comes down to it, you're going to have to look at who is the biggest star. Is it Kenny Omega? Is it Rich Swann? Or is it Moose? When it comes to Rebellion, there only is going to be one winner. There is only going to be one winner, and that's going to be Kenny Omega. I think Kenny Omega is going to be both the AEW and Impact Wrestling World Champion. Because Kenny Omega's too big of a star to lose. He is too big of a star to lose. And do you really think that AEW would agree to lending over? Because this is what it is. As part of this working relationship, they're allowing Impact Wrestling to book their world champion. They're saying, we're willing to let our world champion, Kenny Omega, appear on your programming and work matches for your promotion. But do you really think that AEW are going to be willing to do that and then have their world champion lose in the main event to Impact Wrestling's world champion? And Impact Wrestling, which is a smaller promotion, that's the nuts and bolts of it. Do you really think that AEW are going to be willing to do that? The answer, of course, is no. So there really is only one winner there, that being Kenny Omega. And I think that's a good thing for Impact Wrestling. Are you kidding me? Impact Wrestling having their world champion be Kenny Omega, and the buzz of having Kenny Omega be both the AEW and Impact Wrestling world champion would be massive for both companies. I think it's a win-win for both companies. The issue, I think, may be, and maybe this is a problem to figure out sometime down the line, maybe this is a problem to figure out after the fact or something like that. The issue then becomes, when does Kenny Omega lose the Impact World Championship? I think that hinges on how long he's the AEW World Champion for. As long as he's the AEW World Champion, you could argue that he probably isn't going to drop the Impact World Championship to a member of the Impact Wrestling roster. Why? Because he's the AEW World Champion and he's not going to be doing many jobs. I think if he loses the AEW World Championship at, say, Double or Nothing or something like that around May, then possibly he can then hold the Impact World Championship till, say, July, around Slammiversary time, and then he can drop the World Championship, and it's not as bad as the AEW World Champion doing a job to someone on the Impact Wrestling roster. Now, I know some people might say, well, what's so terrible about Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion, doing a job to someone on the Impact Wrestling roster? Well, I guess the issue would be is that AEW is constantly saying that wins and losses matter, and if I know that technically they don't count the win-loss record of someone that isn't signed to AEW, but if Kenny Omega, say, loses the Impact World Championship to Rich Swann sometime later on after Rebellion, people will say, well, why shouldn't Rich Swann get an opportunity at the AEW World Championship? There's a bit of a logic issue. I think that might be the problem there. Nevertheless, I think Kenny Omega is going to become the Impact World Champion at Rebellion. I think it's going to be a great match, but I think the destination they're heading towards is Kenny Omega being this belt collector. It's going to be interesting to see if they actually just retire the TNA World Heavyweight Championship after the match at Sacrifice, because I would assume the way that they're billing it as AEW World Champion versus Impact Wrestling World Champion, that the TNA World Heavyweight Championship will probably disappear. Whether that's Moose allowing it to disappear or Rich Swann allowing it to disappear, we'll have to wait and see. Personally, I would like to see them do it a bit similar to the WWE Undisputed Championship with Chris Jericho, where they hold both championships. So if it is Moose or if it is Rich Swann, they're carrying both the Impact World Championship and the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, purely because when they drop the title to Kenny Omega at Rebellion, that gives Kenny Omega 2 more bouts, and then he can really hype up this whole bout collector storyline that he's actually holding the AEW World Championship, the Impact World Championship, and the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. I think that would be a fantastic visual. And this is what I've said about Kenny Omega winning the World Championship all along, is that people might say, well, why would you have an AEW star win the Impact World Championship? Doesn't that hurt the company? Doesn't that hurt Impact Wrestling? Again, the answer is no. It really doesn't, because as Impact World Champion, you kind of have a duty. I know Brock Lesnar would disagree with this, but as World Champion, you kind of have a duty to at least have a presence on the show. So I think Kenny Omega being the Impact World Champion means he's going to be on Impact Wrestling every week for the foreseeable future. That's a big win. That's a big win, obviously. He's one of the best wrestlers in the world and one of the most popular wrestlers in the world. That's a big win for Impact Wrestling, so that's one. Two, every time that Kenny Omega appears on AEW Dynamite or an AEW pay-per-view, which obviously has a significantly larger audience than Impact Wrestling does, holding the Impact World Championship is essentially, Kenny Omega's a walking billboard at that point for Impact Wrestling. Every time he appears on screen, he is telling the fans, tune into Impact Wrestling Tuesday nights on Access TV because I'm the World Champion there too. I'm doing great things there as well. So for me, it's a win-win. It really is a win-win for Impact Wrestling. It's a win for AEW because it makes their star and their world champion Kenny Omega appear to be this next level mythic pro wrestler that not only is the world champion of their promotion but has infiltrated other promotions. He'd be the AEW world champion, the Impact world champion, the AAA mega champion. It's just this extended dominance, isn't it, across all of these promotions, and it makes their world champion seem like the biggest and best world champion in the world. And in the process, it helps elevate Impact Wrestling too. Like I mentioned, Kenny Omega becomes a walking billboard for Impact Wrestling. You get a great pay-per-view main event out of it, even though in my opinion I think the result is probably slightly predictable in that Kenny Omega is going to win the match, because I just don't see a scenario where Moose or Rich Swann defeat Kenny Omega clean. As far as people saying, well, it might be a no contest, a disqualification, something like that. I mean, I wouldn't be stunned. I would be slightly surprised that they would be willing to do that. I mean, that's a very WWE thing to do, and it's very much a taking the fans' money and running, almost, isn't it? Because you know that fans are going to be incredibly interested in this pay-per-view main event. Fans are going to be fascinated to see, is Kenny Omega going to win the World Championship? Who is going to hold both the AEW and Impact Wrestling World Championships? People are going to pay their hard-earned cash and their hard-earned money to watch this event, and if it ends up being, we don't actually see a definitive outcome, it's a no contest, and both guys just keep their World Championships and run away, that's bait-and-switch booking. That's bait-and-switch booking, and that actually has the potential to turn people away from the Impact Wrestling and AEW product, and I don't think Impact and AEW would be wanting to do that. That's short-term booking without any long-term looking ahead. So I would be very surprised if they did that. I don't think that they'll do that. I think we will get a definitive finish at Rebellion, and I think that's going to be Kenny Omega being the AEW, the Impact Wrestling, and the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. I think he's going to hold all three bouts. I think the bout collector truly is going to come to life, and I think that's going to mean that this AEW and Impact Wrestling relationship, this working relationship, is going to continue on and on and on and on. And like I say, every time when I talk about this subject here on the YouTube channel, when it comes to AEW and Impact Wrestling, it's only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it really only has begun. And every single week we see a different turn, we see something different. We see latest developments, we see this relationship get bigger and bigger and bigger. Both companies are very happy and on very good terms and very happy about how this working relationship is developing and benefiting both promotions. So I think it's going to continue for the foreseeable future, and I think that's going to be spearheaded by Kenny Omega holding both world championships. So it's going to be very exciting to see. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the AEW World Title versus Impact World Title match being announced for Rebellion in April? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.